Hey there, it's Donkey Storm and welcome to my Augmentation Evoker Mythic Plus guide for Dragonflight Season 3. By the end of this guide, I want you to feel confident in taking an Augmentation Evoker into a Mythic Plus key and executing the rotation, as well as using your utility to help your group smash that timer. We're going to take a look at talents, stats, rotation, and utility, so check out those in the timestamps if you're just looking for something specific. Despite a series of nerfs, Augmentation Evoker is looking to continue to be in a fantastic place for Mythic Plus this season. This spec makes tanks tankier, healers healier, and DPS DPSier. You also bring an insane amount of utility to a 5-man group, and it's looking like Augmentation is going to continue to have no problem finding a group in the Mythic Plus world in Dragonflight Season 3. The goal of Augmentation Evoker in a 5-man setting is to maintain as high of uptime as possible on your buffs, Prescience, Blistering Scales, and Ebb and Might, while leveraging your massive utility kit to make things run as smoothly as possible. Your overall DPS as an Aug Evoker is typically somewhere between that of a healer and a tank, and the way that an Aug is generally perceived as having done their job is the amount of uptime you have on your buffs. Not a perfect indicator of good play, but since DPS and heal meters don't really mean a lot to us, it's all we really have to go off of. So to accomplish this, we're going to run the same talent setup as we did in Season 2, as there's really no need to make any changes in a 5-man setting due to any balance changes or our new tier set. Here's my recommended talent build. I'm not going to go in depth on the build as there's very little variation in what Augmentation Evokers run in Mythic Plus. In the Evoker class tree, you might sacrifice a point out of something like Instinctive Arcana or Inherent Resistance to take Overawe on Raging Weeks or Sleepwalk on Afflicted Weeks if your group needs the extra help with the affixes. We'll get more into what your talents are actually doing for you when we talk about the spell rotation and utility sections. You can also find this talent build down in the description below. For stats, Evoker has a clear hierarchy: Intellect, Mastery, then Haste, then Crit, and finally Verse. Your Ebb and Might spell buffs your group by a percentage of your intellect, so raising that percentage is huge. Your Mastery increases the duration of your buffs, so these two stats are king when it comes to helping Aug do what it wants to do. We also have a new tier set this season. Your 2 set causes every 3rd Prescience you cast to last 100% longer, and your 4 set makes your Prescience casts add damage to your Eruption and helps extend your Ebb and Might. Nothing about this tier set is going to change the way we play, and while the 4 set seems like it will be nice to have, you're not going to be totally gimped without it in a 5-man setting. So let's get into the juicy stuff. How do you actually play this spec? I always like to break down rotations into layers. The first layer of your rotation as an Aug Evoker is your maintenance buffs. You can slap Source of Magic on your healer and pretty much forget about it for the entirety of the dungeon, as long as it doesn't go over 40 minutes. God help you if it does. You are going to keep both charges of your Prescience on cooldown on your other 2 DPS players 100% of the time. This is a smart cast, so you shouldn't need to mouse over them or target them or anything like that, as long as they're in your range. So you are going to want to try and position yourself in such a way that you can get Prescience on both your DPS players whenever needed. Finally, you're going to maintain Blistering Scales on your tank. Based on the rate that stacks of this buff drop off, you're generally casting it off of cooldown to refresh it. You don't have to wait until the very last charge falls off to refresh it. We are taking the Molten Blood talent, however, so do keep in mind that casting Blistering Scales on a lower health tank will grant them a larger shield. Personally, I've usually viewed this more as a nice to have than something to really play around, but if you really want to min-max it, you can keep that talent in mind when you cast the spell. Your second and most important layer of your rotation after keeping up your maintenance buffs is your Ebb and Might buff. This is pretty much your bread and butter as an Evoker. Once you cast Ebb and Might, you can extend the buff in a number of ways: casting an Empower spell, casting Breath of Eons, or casting Eruption. Your goal when Ebb and Might is up is to cram as many of these spells into your rotation as you can until the buff falls off. This is going to look something like this. First, cast Tip the Scales if it's up, and use any trinkets or potions if you want. Then cast Ebb and Might, cast Breath of Eons if it's up, cast Fire Breath to extend Ebb and Might and grant you Inferno's Blessing from your talent, cast Upheaval, and then dump your Essence and Essence Burst procs on Eruption. Once you're out of Essence, you'll either spam Living Flame on 1 or 2 targets, or Azure Strike on 3 or more. If you generate an Essence Burst proc and there's still time on Ebb and Might, send that thing. Once Ebb and Might goes on cooldown, you go into complete dormancy. The main rules when Ebb and Might is on cooldown is to never use an Empower spell and bank your essence for Eruption. Just spam your filler spells and make sure you're trying to be useful with your utility. If you follow this rule, you'll find that your Ebb and Might, Fire Breath, and Upheaval are always lined up perfectly and ready to go for the next Ebb and Might window. You are generally just using Ebb and Might on cooldown. The only times I'd really advise holding it is if you know there's a crucial burn phase coming and there's a chance Ebb and Might won't be up on your group for it. Not having Ebb and Might up during a key DPS phase is actually crippling to your group because it's almost as if they only have 2 DPS players instead of 3. Also, don't do something silly like blowing an Ebb and Might when the mobs are in a pull are nearly dead and all your uptime is just going to be used up running to the next pack. Not that I've ever done that or anything, just saying. Personally though, since the Aug rotation is pretty easy to get nailed down after you give it some practice, I think it's how you use your utility for your group that's going to set you apart from other Augs and make you a good player. It's also probably the most fun and rewarding part of the spec, in my opinion anyway. So let's get into the utility kit and how to use it. And let's start with how you can help your party survive. Your talent Draconic Attunements gives you the ability to switch between 2 stances. Black, which increases your party health by 4%, and Bronze, which increases your party movement speed by 10%. I'd recommend defaulting to having Black up almost always in a key that's not completely trivial, and just swapping to Bronze for longer runs between packs or those annoying dungeons where you can't mount. Additionally, the Aspect's Favor talent increases the party health bonus of Black Attunement to 8% when you use your defensive Obsidian Scales. Yep, when you press your defensive, everyone gets more health. So you should view your defensive, which has 2 charges by the way, as actually kind of a party-wide defensive ability. Even more reason to use it when you know that damage is coming out. You've also got Zephyr, 20% damage reduction and 30% movement speed increase for almost 10 seconds on less than a 2-minute cooldown. You should be using this bad boy when you know big party damage is coming. You can even combine these 2 talents and rotate through Obsidian Scales and Zephyr on boss phases to make sure that you're always making the healer's life easier. I've also recommended the talent Twin Guardian in this guide. When you cast Rescue on someone, you give them and yourself a pretty decently sized shield. You don't have to actually take them anywhere, just swoop someone up real quick and give them a shield if it looks like they or you need one. Let's also not forget you've got Emerald Blossom and Verdant Embrace to use for off healing that cost you essentially nothing, and Cauterizing Flames to dispel essentially anything, even bleeds, on a 1-minute cooldown. Honestly, all this party survivability is part of what makes Aug so good, and if you're not using it, you're ignoring a massive part of what makes your spec extremely good. So really, do it, or we're all going to be super disappointed in you. But wait, there's so much more. How about CC? We can throw out an oppressing roar at the beginning of a pull to make everyone's CCs last 50% longer. And we have our own CC too, Wing Buffet. Yes, I know how to pronounce it, it's Wing Buffet, for a knockback to disrupt casting or reposition mobs, Tail Swipe to disrupt casting, an 18-second cooldown kick, which is really nice for ranged DPS, and did I mention we have Bloodlust? Yeah, you're playing a god spec, guys. Act accordingly. But seriously, work on getting that rotation down to muscle memory and then just play like the Swiss Army knife that Augmentation excels at, and you're going to bring a ridiculous amount of value to any group you join. But if you really want to showcase some utility, why don't you go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to see more WoW content if you made it this far or if you enjoyed the guide, guys. Also, I'm streaming Augmentation gameplay in Season 3, so follow me here on YouTube and over on Twitch at twitch.tv/DonkeyStorm. Thank you for watching and happy auging.